I'm not going to introduce the panel, except to say they're all good friends, and I'm grateful that all of you are here. I know some of you have been here before and others not, and I'm pleased to have you. I will just say that I'm appreciative again that Chris Lewis is here, because Chris, I know without fear of contradiction that we don't agree on absolutely everything. We do agree on some things, Chris from Public Knowledge, but in line with what I said earlier about being able to have a diversity of views, I'm glad that Chris is here for that. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to the moderators. I'm not going to give you any biographical information except to say that Seth Cooper is Senior Fellow and Director of Communications Policy Studies here at FSF, and Andrew Long is Senior Fellow. And again, I can say this without any fear of being contradicted or being wrong. They are two of the most experienced people here in Washington, or really across the nation, when it comes to communications law and policy. Their expertise is terrific, and they have long experience in the matters that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm really glad that they're both part of our team at Free State Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you, Randy, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to be introducing our panelists today. We have with us Clint Odom, who's Vice President of Strategic Alliances and External Affairs at T-Mobile. In his position, he's responsible for shaping and advancing T-Mobile's public policy agenda. He previously served as Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy and Executive Director at the National Urban League's Washington Bureau. Prior to that, he's served in capacities in the United States Senate for then Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Bill Nelson of Florida. He's also served as Vice President of Public Policy with Verizon Communications and Verizon New Jersey. And he was a senior advisor at the FCC, including to Chairman William Kennard and then Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. He's a graduate of Louisiana State University and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. So welcome, Clint. We're glad to have you here. We also have with us Michael O'Reilly, former commissioner, as many of you know, of the Federal Communications Commission. He is the principal at MP O'Reilly Consulting, LLC, visiting fellow of Hudson's Institute Center for Economics of the Internet, and a senior fellow at the Media Institute. And of course, we know him also from his extensive experience at the FCC and in working on a variety of staff positions on the Hill. So we're glad to have you join us again, Michael. Thank you. We also have with us Christopher Lewis. Welcome back, Christopher. He's the President and CEO of Public Knowledge. He previously served in other capacities at Public Knowledge as Vice President from 2012 to 2019, where he led the organization's day-to-day advocacy and political strategy on the Hill and agencies. He was also served 2 terms at the Alexandria City Public School Board. He's on the board of directors for the Institute of Local Self-Reliance and represents Public Knowledge on the Broadband Internet Technical Advisory Group, BTAG. Previously, Mr. Lewis worked in the FCC's Office of Legislative Affairs and as a U.S. staffer for late Senator Edward Kennedy, as well as for political campaign experience, and he is a graduate from Harvard University. We also finally have with us Rick Chesson, who is Senior Vice President, Legal and Regulatory Affairs, and Chief Legal Officer at NCTA, the Internet Television Association. He manages the legal department in the association's relationship with the FCC. Previously, prior to NCTA, he spent 14 years of service at the FCC. He initially joined the commission back in 1994 as a senior attorney in the Cable Services Bureau, and then in other positions, including senior legal advisor to former Commissioner Michael Copps. And we're delighted to have, he's also a law degree from Harvard Law School and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. So thank you, Rick, for joining us as well. And now for the questions to start off, I'll turn it over to my co-moderator colleague.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I thought I'd start off with an easy, digestible topic, and that's broadband funding. $1 trillion maybe, huh? Rick asked me to kick off with a question about tax policy, but I'm not going to do that, Rick. Tax policy is important, but I do want to talk about the potential for too much money and overbuilding and waste and fraud and abuse. As Senator Thune mentioned, we've got at least 130 programs. It's concerning that no one really knows that exact number. We've got 15 plus agencies. Again, someone should have a handle on exactly how many agencies. And we've got somewhere between $175 billion and $1 trillion to fix a problem that 10 years ago was defined as an $80 billion problem. So the question is, what might go wrong? Are you more worried about overbuilding? Are you more worried about waste? And if you don't want to talk about what's going wrong, perhaps Chris, how do you think this is a good thing? And how is this going to achieve ubiquitous connectivity and bring everybody into the internet age? So I will start with Clint.
Well, thank you for the question. And it's wonderful to be here with so many friends. This is a reminder I need to get out and do this more often because it's just great to see so many friendly faces, people I've worked with. And I think all four of us have been at the FCC at the same time in different rooms. So I think that's pretty cool as well. You know, T-Mobile as a wireless, pure wireless carrier is not going to participate very robustly in the BEAD program. Our largest focus is going to be in ACP, which is a part of IJA as well.
Don't spoil it. We're going to get to that next.
We're very concerned about overbuilding. You know, we do have a national broadband policy in this country. It's broadband everywhere. It's broadband affordable, and teaching people the value of broadband. It seems to me, as an initial matter, if we're going to get broadband everywhere, we're going to use this once in a lifetime. I actually reject the notion that this is once in a generation. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get public funding. We've got to get it right, and we really can't afford to overbuild in places that are going to be just fine. So overbuilding is a real concern. We're going to talk probably more about ACP. I won't get on my soapbox here, but those funds are designed to deal with broadband affordability, the second prong in our national broadband strategy. This money will exhaust, and it'll probably exhaust right around the time of our presidential election. So we've got to be able to figure out a sustainable way and a permanent way to fund ACP, which by all accounts has been a fairly successful program. I don't think it'll be the subject of as many GAO reports in the future as the BEAD program will be, for whatever that's worth.
Thanks. Michael?
Sure. So I'm happy to talk about ACP, and hopefully we're going to get there, so I'll wait my comments there. But, you know, am I concerned about waste or overbuilding? The answer is yes. I'm concerned about both. Absolutely. You know, there's a great potential for a third of the dollars, maybe more, to go right down the swishing toilet bowl. And I'm really concerned about that. And overbuilding, absolutely, we have a big problem on overbuilding. There's potential to, instead of the dollars going where they absolutely must go, to the unserved population, those that don't have it, the dollars are going to go to bring in another competitor in areas that already do have it, and a very robust system operating today. And it may not be these dollars yet because they haven't gone out the door if we're talking about BEAD, but other programs, whether they be state or federal programs, have started to have their dollars go out, and we're already seeing the problems. I've seen them in New Hampshire and Maine. I see overbuilding. You want to talk about overbuilding? The Agriculture Department has a Reconnect program some of you are familiar with. Its overbuilding threshold is 50%. 50%. They can overbuild 50% of the community with their dollars. There's a Thune-Lujan bill and others to try and raise that back up to 90%. So you'd still have 10% of overbuilding. And we'll see if that can make it into the farm bill. I've said nice things about the correction, but at 50%, we've actually just, we're going to just, waste those dollars on building a competitor, and some portion of population in rural America will not get service because of that. So I'm deeply concerned on both aspects. If the goal is to bring broadband to those that don't have it today, then we have a chance to really screw this up.
Chris?
Andrew, thank you. I'm going to keep you as negative as I can for you, Andrew.
Awesome.
We have a serious problem of lack of boldness and lack of leadership. And if you are concerned about waste, you should be concerned about authority and oversight. If you're concerned about overbuilding, which I'm not terribly concerned about, but I know some folks are, you should be concerned about the quality of the maps and the money going to the places where it needs to go. Folks talk about overbuilding, but then you have communities reporting right now that the maps do not adequately reflect that they don't have broadband. And so you have the opposite of overbuilding. You have people who are potentially going to get skipped over if we don't correct these things. And it's because we have traditionally relied on industry self-reporting about whether people are served or not. And that has proven to be inadequate. And we've known that going back to the National Broadband Plan a decade ago. To me, that's a lack of boldness and leadership. And Congress has proven that it does not have the capability to provide that oversight. All four of us, as Clint said, have served at the FCC. There's a reason all four of us are up here talking about broadband policy, because the FCC is the best place for that authority. And I really, really wish they would give them more teeth to do that work and address each one of these concerns. But as Commissioner O'Reilly said, the chief among them should be, when we're done with this, does everyone have service? And if that's not your primary concern, then we're all in this for the wrong reasons.
Rick?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for having me. I think you started talking about the amount of money and the number of people who are giving it out, and it is unprecedented, and it is a lot of money going out very quickly in the scheme of things. And so that raises coordination issues, which we can talk about, but it also raises oversight questions. And let me just maybe focus on BEAD for now, since that's sort of the biggest nut that we're looking at. We're a little bit different than some of the other folks on this panel in that our members do want to participate in the BEAD program. And here are the four things that sort of worry me. I can tick them off really quickly. First is what people have talked about, which is keeping the focus on the unserved. If we don't close this digital divide once and for all with the money that we have, shame on us. This is really an opportunity to do that. We need to keep focused on that. There will be people who will continually be trying to push to serve slightly more economically advantageous areas. We need to keep the focus on the truly unserved. The second is removing obstacles. And there's a lot of obstacles out there. I think Congressman Latter talked about licensing. I would add pole attachments to that. These are the things that, when you're actually building networks, can really delay and add costs and slow things down immeasurably. So we need help in removing those obstacles. I think NTA is requiring people to come up with a permitting plan when the states come to them. And I think that that's something that they need to look closely at. The third is the selection criteria. We need to make sure that the people picked to build these things put us in the best chance for success for actually closing the digital divide. And that means funding people who know how to build networks. This is not easy. Building networks is a complicated thing. Do they have the relationships? Do they have the supply chains? Do they have the teams who know how to build networks and know how to do aerial installs and in-the-ground installs? Can they do that? And more also, just as importantly, can they operate the network once it's built? It's one thing to build a network, it's another thing to operate the network. I'm thinking of things like cybersecurity, where you need teams of people working around the clock trying to keep people safe. So we need experience, we need trusted people who have a track record of knowing how to build. And finally, mission creep is a concern. I think we need to avoid mission creep. Again, I think Professor Yu talked about this a little earlier. There are people who would like to add all sorts of things to the idea that we're going to build these networks and serve the unserved. That should be the focus. So when you talk about things like open access, rate regulation, or certain personnel requirements on providers, all those things add cost. And the whole point of these unserved areas is that the economic case is already really fragile. And to add costs to an already fragile business case just makes it that much more risky. So those are the four things I would say.
Thanks, Rick. We will return to broadband subsidies, but I'm going to turn it back over to Seth.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask about the issue of digital discrimination. The FCC has an ongoing proceeding. It's proposed rules that would address the issue of digital discrimination of broadband access. And Rick, I might want to start with you, although I certainly want, Chris, I want to have your views on this as well. Actually, every panelist who's interested, because public knowledge has been very active on the issue and provided very thorough and detailed comments in this proceeding. Rick, we've seen a number of comments come in now in the FCC's proposed rules. It's proposed to prohibit not only intentional digital discrimination against persons of certain delineated categories, but also a disparate impact. And there's been a lot of debate about that in the comments, whether the rules can go that far or whether they should. Could you express your viewpoint on that? And since the commission, I guess I want to hedge it a little bit, since the commission appears to be going that way to address disparate impact, do you support the idea of any kind of specific safe harbors or other limits that would go along with that?
Thanks. Yeah, this is a really important topic, and we're looking for a pragmatic solution that works. We think the statute supports what we call a disparate treatment standard. I would make clear that disparate treatment doesn't necessarily mean you need a smoking gun. You don't need somebody saying, I intend to not build to this area because there's such and such class of people there. You can use circumstantial evidence in our view to get there. There can be all sorts of things that could be used to imply that. Whatever they do use, though, whether it's some form of disparate impact or disparate treatment, we do think that there should be some clarity for providers and some predictability as you build out networks. Because I think everybody agrees that not every difference is discrimination. The Act is not a universal service statute. It's a non-discrimination statute. So that means that, for instance, if an MDU owner won't let you in the building and so you can't build there, that's not discrimination. That's what Congress sort of called a technical or economic feasibility issue. Or if somebody is really far from the road, there can be differences, or if there are tough geographic areas, there's a whole slew of things that could lead to differences. And I just think from our point of view, the clear that the FCC can be upfront about what those are. I don't necessarily think they need to be called safe harbors, but there should be some indication from the FCC so we don't have to go through the whole process of litigation and defenses and to come up with things that everybody would agree shouldn't be considered discriminatory. And I think that's something that we're focused on.
Okay. Chris, do you have any response on that particular point? Or the issue?
I've known Rick for a while, and forgive me, I haven't heard your explanation or if it was in your filings about disparate treatment, so I don't know that I could comment on that as a definition. However, The idea that it's a discrimination statute and not a universal service statute, first of all, goes to my point that we don't have clear authority at the FCC to address universal service for broadband, number one. If we did, then perhaps we could get at a variety of remedies to make sure that everyone has service. Number two, a number of the things that Rick outlined, some of the things that Rick outlined as to why someone might not have broadband, like it's far from the road, which is a cost issue. You hear that in rural areas too. The MDU issues. These are things that can be achieved. These are folks who can be served with the will to reach them and to solve the specific problem that it takes to reach them. This specific problem that's addressed in the digital discrimination proceeding has been well documented by civil society. Unfortunately, has not been well documented by the FCC. And now it's finally in front of them to look at. But in the spot studies that we've seen of cities, the neighborhoods that get left out are often densely populated neighborhoods that should have an economic case to reach them if only the provider chose to bring service to that area. Or they provide a quality of service that has not been upgraded, like it's been upgraded in neighborhoods that are right beside those often low-income or minority communities. These are choices. There are economic models that all the providers use to determine if there's enough people in that neighborhood to get a return on investment. This is not hard to do, and yet these neighborhoods get skipped. So I think it's an important proceeding. We've supported the idea of disparate impact. We supported the idea that the FCC should have a mandate to make sure that everyone gets served in a non-discriminatory way, and that is core to its mission. Not everyone will agree with that because not everyone agrees with our position on the FCC's authority, but it is long part of their tradition to make sure that telecommunications in some form doesn't skip over people. There are ways, to your question, there are ways to help providers in meeting that need. I don't think we need to be pointing a finger of racism at everyone, which some folks are worried that is going to happen. If it's a problem with the provider's model, let's adjust the way they think about models. If it's a problem with folks being low income, that's why we have low income subsidies. But we can get there by piecing together the different causes of why people are not served, and that's what we're looking to do.
Okay, well, Chris, I want to stick with you for a moment because I looked at a lot of the comments in this proceeding, and a lot of them cited a handful of studies, pointing to what they considered a problem, and yet a lot of these areas where a certain provider, maybe a fiber provider, didn't build out, those areas are almost overwhelmingly already served by a cable provider. So, I mean, should there be liability in that case if a provider sees that there's high-speed cable broadband being served to an area, maybe there's just not a business case for building to that. What would be your response to that?
So this is my point. There were spot studies done in communities, and we have not seen a more comprehensive study. I think the most comprehensive one was done by a journalist group that tried to cobble together the United States should not rely on small nonprofits in communities alone to study if people have broadband or not. It's the FCC, it should be the FCC's job. So if folks don't like how those studies are done, let's get the experts on the job. If there's a quality of broadband that's being met by cable in a neighborhood, and they're the lone provider there, then I consider that neighborhood served. But at this time, all we have are those studies. All we have is, and you can pick, it's not one company, it's multiple companies. It's largely been studied, yes, with the telecom companies, or the legacy, telephone companies, but it's been shown that they pick and choose which neighborhoods that they serve or that they upgrade to. I think that's problematic. And we are not, as concerned about overbuilding as some of the other folks here. Having a competitor there would actually be good for the market. It might hopefully bring down some prices for folks as well. So if that is the case, that someone just has one offering and it's cable, then let's actually study the competition in the marketplace. There's so much we could be doing here, and we're just scratching the surface. And we've advocated for this proceeding. We're grateful for it. But it's a narrow fix to a bigger problem.
Okay. Well, Clint, I'd be interested in your view on this issue. And in particular, as a wireless provider, you're often dependent on local processes for approval for building towers and getting the construction. I mean, I'd be interested in just your priorities in this proceeding, but any concerns you have, particularly where some areas might be difficult because of the local permitting processes that are in place.
No, well, let me start by saying, I've committed a large portion of my professional life to rooting out injustice. I'm probably the only person on the stage who's testified before Congress on the pernicious problem of housing discrimination and redlining. This is a very serious problem in the housing context. The fact that there are little to no studies or spot studies on this practice in broadband is potentially problematic, and I want to sort of come back to that. T-Mobile is committed and it's on pace to covering 99% of the population of the United States with 5G service, 90% of rural areas in the United States. The fact that there's no record that Congress relied on to pass the provisions of IJA that we're talking about here is a real problem, and it's not a problem that the FCC gets a pass on because the fact-finding wasn't done in Congress. Anytime that you undertake a regulatory regime on a thin or not robust record, that's a problem legally, and it's also a problem from the standpoint of how does the agency and how should the agency allocate its resources. We've said in our comments that wireless is different. We don't build our networks along, fixed broadband rights of way or community contours. We build our networks in a way that power radiates out, and we're trying to get as many people within our coverage range as possible, including and especially in areas that are low income, that are communities or people of color. We filed in our record, well above 95% of our 5G signal covers communities that are considered communities of color. So if the agency can't see its way to treating wireless differently or establishing a record that would justify the actual harm or risk of harm, like what's our incentive to bypass these communities, I think we should be looking at some sort of different treatment for carriers who are out there serving in robust and real ways. Some of the things that are being talked about today, and I don't want to bore you all with disparate impact, disparate treatment. Here's the punchline. If a company can be hauled to the FCC to account for why it does not have broadband in a particular area, and if the absence of that service can be intimated or suggested or proof of a discriminatory intent, this is a show that's going to be coming to a lot of this industry and is not a good precedent, is not what I think Congress intended when it passed these provisions. And as someone who's studied housing and civil rights law, I can tell you it does not fall into that narrow description of why we allow disparate impact evidence to be used in housing and age and race discrimination claims. I hope there are robust safe harbors, and I hope that my company isn't, is accused of being a discriminatory company because we have not upgraded a particular site or a community as fast as some people would like us to. It's problematic, and I hope the FCC sees it as such.
All right, Mike, I want to ask you, we've had some feedback here on this panel about spot studies and a lack of any kind of more comprehensive look at who has access and for purposes of this proceeding. I mean, do you think the broadband maps could be a factor? I mean, or should be, as if the future of these rules and their enforcement? I mean, if it doesn't it to me, it seems to me to kind of make the case against liability if we really don't have any good picture of what's going on where.
Well, look,
That seems quite fair, but so I'd be interested in your
yeah.
thoughts.
So, lots of different thoughts here. But and first and foremost, I think you have to recognize the statute is not the most artfully drafted. So it's going to be challenged multiple times by multiple players because it's messy. And I think that's something that can really concern those that follow the commission, because it can send them into a dark rabbit hole in litigating this out. Hopefully, I think, I agree with Rick's point, they find a more practical solution to try and execute the mandate that Congress has asked of them. But I do think there's, as we talked about in the first question, there's a ton of money headed for broadband build out and access. If there were problems in terms of, for whatever reason there were problems, these should be addressed, and we're going to have a ton of funding going to make sure that everyone has broadband. I do worry about overbuilding. I don't think it's something you can just say, well, it brings a new competitor. It's a subsidized competitor, and that's problematic for the market. It's problematic for where the dollars should go. So I'm worried about that. But if we want to talk about maps, well, yeah, I think the commission has a challenge before us. It is hopefully coming to the conclusion of new broadband maps in the next couple of months. The old maps were always historically bad. They weren't built for the reason that we used them for or wanted to use them for. And now we have a new map coming forward. The first round was critiqued for many different reasons, and we'll see what the second round is, what it looks like, and how complete and how happy people are with it. Is it one reason we may have some of these the overall issue that's being discussed? It's a possibility. It may be that there are practices on economics that led to some of the circumstances we talked about. So there are a lot of different factors. I tend to think that the dollars going towards the problem on access, going towards making sure everybody has broadband, should address the issue.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you for making a segue to bring it back to the next questions from Andrew.
I try.
Maybe not. Maybe not. You can hold that. So I do want to get to the Affordable Connectivity Program, but I want to give you a quick opportunity to talk about what I'm going to call semantics. And this was referred to earlier. Michelle Connolly talked about this a little bit. Definitional ways that you can get money going to places that are already effectively served. So whether it's defining eligibility, Michael, as you pointed out, in the Reconnect program, where up to 50% of the circle that you draw on the map is already served, and that's okay. Other programs have 10%. Whether it's technological neutrality, defining out commercially viable solutions that have been proven in the marketplace. Say, oh, don't count that for whatever reason. We want fiber, or we want symmetrical, or whatever it is. Whether it's, we talked a little bit about net neutrality today. Again, Reconnect, giving people bonus points if they commit to net neutrality. There's a lot of money, and maybe at the end of the day, we will get to ubiquitous service, and so we won't really notice that a ton of money went to overbuild because of definitional loopholes. But, blanket for 1 second. Here, hold on. The real problem with overbuilding, or one problem that I wanted people to address, is that it distracts money from places that need it. Not just that it's punishing commercial, privately funded providers who have taken on the economic risk to provide service there, but if you have a choice between serving a low-density area, a geographically challenged area where your returns are going to be lower, or you can use this money to overbuild, a rational economic actor is probably going to overbuild, because the overbuilding provides you with greater population density and other ways that you're going to get a bigger bang for the buck that you put into this. So I just want to give everybody opportunity to think about this, not just in a way that overbuilding is bad because it punishes existing providers, but if our goal truly is to get broadband everywhere, are these definitional loopholes that allow people to overbuild going to undermine the goal, still staying on the connected side, and then we will get to affordability? Run-on, sentence, paragraph, couple pages. Chris, I saw that face, but I can try to clarify, or you can just run with bits and pieces of what I just said. Let's start with Rick.
Yes, clearly. Clearly, you're sort of defining the market. When you define the market, obviously you can look at things differently. If you say, well, wireless doesn't count, this often happens at the FCC. That we'd say, well, there's all this competition, 5G is the next greatest thing since sliced bread, apparently. Oh, but then when the FCC gets down to the decision, they'll say, well, we exclude wireless for blah, blah, blah reasons or something. So if you define the market, you can create a different view of things. Raising the speed was another one that Professor Connolly talked about. I'd also like to mention something else, because I think coordination is key here. And there's a map that I don't think people have really focused on at the FCC. The FCC, everybody knows about the one map that the FCC is working on, which I think is coming along and it is working the way it should, and it's getting better and iterative over time, and it's going to show coverage around the country. There's another map that the FCC is working on under the Infrastructure Act that has to be out I think it's April 15th. And that one shows where all the money's going from all the federal programs. So the RUS, the RDOF, the ARPA money, Treasury, the BEAD money, everything will show up where there's enforceable commitments, because the FCC map only shows what's actually served now. This map will show what government has committed to over the next few years. So if we really want to prevent overbuilding, we need to take that map that shows where the money is going to be going and hopefully even overlay the FCC map to show where coverage is, to see where those real gaps are. Where are the places that not only don't have coverage now, but that won't have coverage in 4 or 5 years? So that's, I think, a coordination issue that you sort of touched on.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Chris?
There was a lot. I'll just pick a couple because I don't want to dominate the microphone.
Sure.
But quality standards, first of all, should be not a hard thing to set and then put forward. And folks will disagree on the high standard that some of us have asked for. Certainly on speeds, people have disagreed on calls for 100 symmetrical. But setting quality standards is important to make sure that households have what they need to do all the wonderful things that we know that broadband can do. So hopefully that's not controversial and certainly not semantics. It should be a technical standard that everyone agrees does a certain thing. Yes, that means that some technologies to provide broadband don't reach that standard yet. I think that's okay. But we need to be honest about what we think folks deserve to have if we're reaching a goal of everyone being served at a certain level.
Can I just want to push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because I think, prior to the money going out, unlicensed fixed wireless was proven in the marketplace. People invested in building out this technology, this infrastructure, and people signed up for it. So how can it not count as broadband if it's actually been proven in the marketplace? Isn't that the answer?
Proven how?
Proven as a viable business that people sign up for and pay for on a monthly basis and use to do all the things that we care about people doing
People
online.
sign up for DSL when they can't get anything better than that. DSL doesn't meet the quality standards that we're now aspiring to. At least if it does, forgive me, DSL folks, but that's my understanding.
Right.
So we get to set, as a society, the standard that we think should be met. And if that means that certain technologies are not holding up to that quality standard, I think that's an okay thing for us to set. If we're also, if we're gonna be okay with setting one standard for some folks and one standard for another set of folks who live in a harder to reach area, then let's just be transparent about that. The other thing I wanted to mention, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting it because you got me talking about quality standards. Oh man, I just don't remember. Yeah, jump in, Mike, yeah.
Maybe not on the same exact line of thinking you got going on there. Look, I don't think these are definitional loopholes or semantics we're talking about. These are, in many instances, ignoring the law. I can argue the digital discrimination language is very messy and going to lead to a lot of issues. I don't think the technological neutrality language in the infrastructure bill is that hard to interpret, and yet the BEAD money is going to go in certain directions, and that is to me is either misreading the law or ignoring it intentionally. We saw this in hearings on Capitol Hill already exposed. I think bonus points for net neutrality, a lot of these things we're talking about are skirting what Congress act for, and they get to decide these things. We elect those members to make decisions, and you can like them or not, but they made decisions and they put them into the statute, and the president signs it, or they put it into a bill and the president signs it, and that becomes what's supposed to feed and govern what the agencies and the departments do. And here they're intentionally moving the ball opposite what Congress asked for, and told them to do. So I think these are problems. I think we'll overall survive. I think they're going to be, it's harder to stretch the dollars if fiber is a preference. It's going to be harder to stretch those dollars, and it's going to influence who gets fiber and who doesn't, and who gets other technologies. Very viable other technologies are out there, and they're being ignored as we speak, and that's going to it has an impact on the next 10 or 15 years of technological development, and that it's going to affect how it does for the wireless industry, how it treats cable providers, and if everything has to be fiber, well, it has an impact. So I just think this is something where they're not semantics; these are actually ignoring the law.
I 100% agree. I would point out that, for example, that one of the problems is that you can put some of the onus here on Congress, because the BEAD money's from the IIJA for sure, and there was technological neutrality language therein. But a lot of this money, in an unknown amount, we're looking at an absolute floor of probably $22 billion, is ARPA money going to Treasury. And ARPA was very brief on specifics as to what Treasury was supposed to do with that money. And so where you get Treasury rules that say, you know what, underserved, unserved, that we think there are broader policy goals that might appropriately inspire someone to request and receive money to build where service already exists. I mean, yes, there are problems here where unserved and underserved places are not going to be prioritized, but some of that blame, I think, falls on Congress outside of the IIJA, which had the good language to which you refer.
Yeah, but that good language is still being ignored. But so
yes.
even with good language, you still have a problem. But your point is valid on the Treasury. We had the COVID crisis, and a lot of the money went quickly, and hopefully they learned those lessons. And and part of it, I testified before we got to the BEAD money, and hopefully that had an influence on the process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's a lot of discussion here about fiber and wireless, and we do a lot of thinking about that at T-Mobile, as you might imagine. One of the things about fiber, despite the very pronounced preference for fiber under the rules, under the BEAD rules, is that fiber is going to take a hell of a long time to deploy. And if you were listening to Senator Thune's opening remarks, if you've listened to Rick talking about the importance of serving unserved areas, you have to consider that there are other technologies out there that are capable of broadband speeds, even the ones that we're talking about that are futuristic. 5G is one of those options, not just mobile service, but home broadband service. And if you are unconvinced that home internet or fixed wireless is not a real competitor to fiber or to fixed broadband, someone explained to me why Rick's clients are running and deluging the airwaves with ads taking on, really funny ads, I might add, really funny ads taking on our home internet product. It's a competitive threat, and it can be turned on instantly. We think about the fact that there are 40 million pops in the United States that are waiting for broadband in rural and unserved areas in the United States. They're waiting for it. The FCC could today grant, for instance, the license, the 2.5 gigahertz licenses that we won at auction last year, and we could serve people of 50, the 50 states of the United States and Puerto Rico today. There is no more, there are no more mid-band spectrum sources out there in the pipeline. This is the last bit of it. We need to get it out. We need to get it out quickly. And maybe, if we do this right, 5G can be a stalking horse for the construction of other competitive broadband technologies, including fiber. But we're here and we're ready to serve today. This isn't pie in the sky. One day we're going to connect, fiber to these remote places. We're ready to go today.
Right.
And our competitors certainly do view us as a competitive threat. You rarely saw DSL, you rarely saw cable going after DSL in commercials. This is a different thing, and it's really time to change our thinking about what 5G can do in the marketplace.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to start the DSL pile on.
I want to turn matters to spectrum for a little bit. And Clint, I want to start with you. Of course, you're here from the event. It's come up that there's no spectrum in the pipeline, and in fact, the FCC now has no authority to conduct spectrum auction licenses. Right. So there's a lot that needs to be done. I didn't think we'd actually get to the point where the FCC's spectrum license auction authority would be lapsed, but here it is. There are bills that have been floating around in Congress. What do you think needs to go into an ideal bill going forward, or what do you think is at least we should expect in the near term here from Congress?
Yeah, so if you had asked me that question before March 9th, I would have had a great answer for you. Now I'm at the point where I'm like, Congress, pass a damn bill. Get this spectrum authority going again. This is a matter of not just whether and how wireless companies compete against each other. It's a global competitiveness issue. It is a national security issue. And right now we are dead in the water with respect to new mid-band spectrum, which is the sweet spot of the spectrum that actually can achieve speeds comparable to fiber optics. So we need to get this fixed. We have proposed, and a number of former general counsels at the FCC have proposed and shown the FCC how it can free up this spectrum and get it out in the marketplace. 90% of the licenses that were won have not been awarded from that auction. These are licenses that are supposed to serve rural areas. These are the places that this was the auction to fill in the Swiss cheese holes in nationwide 5G coverage, and it's just sitting there not being used because of this problem that's been identified by the FCC as a lack of authority. Even if reasonable minds disagreed over whether Congress or whether the FCC has the authority, I think there's very little dispute that the FCC does have the authority, using its special temporary authority, to give authority to T-Mobile to operate that spectrum in the public interest today. And we have made a filing at the Federal Communications Commission requesting that authority, and we're hoping that the agency will give that authority. Remember, when this 2.5 auction was still a pipe dream, it was people like native tribes, people like rural education associations, folks in Puerto Rico who said, this is an opportunity for us to get mid-band spectrum deployed quickly. Let's get this spectrum out there. And right now, those voices have been stymied, and we'd really like to move past this and get to the point where we have the luxury of talking about, hey, which band segments should we auction next? But right now we're actually talking from a position of being dead in the water, and we've really got to address that as quickly as possible. And its special temporary authority might be the perfect way to get us out of this mess.
Okay, Rick, I'd be interested. Do you have, or very quickly, or if not, from the cable industry, you have more players showing interest in wireless. So do you have a take on the issue of the Spectrum Authority of the FCC's auction license and what you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, we're the new competitor to the big carriers when it comes to wireless services. We favor what we call an all-in approach or all-of-the-above approach, and that it's best to have a diversified spectrum portfolio as a country. It should include exclusive license. It should include shared licensing. And it should include a lot of unlicensed spectrum, which is Wi-Fi, and which everybody in this room is probably using right now. Because each one does its own thing and is better used in certain situations. I think Clint talked about speed to market. There's not a lot of greenfield spectrum out there anymore. So if you want to move speed to market, you're talking about dealing with incumbents. And if you're talking about incumbents, there's different kinds of incumbents. And sometimes you're talking about, like in the 3.1 band, you're talking about the Defense Department, which is difficult and expensive and timely to move. So we think there's a group of engineers working on it, but we think shared shows the most promise there for bringing something to market quickly. We do think unlicensed is critical. I think this is what people think of as the internet is Wi-Fi often. And it works in a complementary way with licensed, exclusive licensed services. If you look at licensed cell service, 80% of it gets offloaded onto unlicensed spectrum. So all of these these models work together. We need to keep making Wi-Fi better. We're going to start bringing gigabit and multi-gigabit services to people's homes. I got my 10G pin right here. And we need that last 50 feet to be able to keep up with what's coming into people's homes. So if we're bringing gigabit speeds into people's homes, the Wi-Fi needs to be gigabit capable too. So that's where we are, and we'd like to see not only that, but also when it comes to auctions, to the extent there are auctions, we'd like to see them constructed in a way that permits others to participate in addition to the big three carriers. We'd like, as you saw in CBRS, lots of people, one license is there, and that's the model we'd like to see.
Mike, on Spectrum, we heard earlier today from NTIA, and they've put out a request for comment about a national spectrum strategy. I think you had spoken in the media some about that. And we don't have any bands really identified in the request for comment, so it was a short request. Are there bands you think ought to be the priorities for this, and anything else you would like to see happen at this point from the national spectrum strategy coming out of NTIA?
Well, I apologize for my short comments on the short document. I didn't mean to criticize the good work that NTIA is trying to do. I understand the challenge that they face. But to the overall question, I absolutely agree that Congress should address the FCC Spectrum Auction Authority issue. That's something that I did probably 5 times in my career, both on Capitol Hill and at the FCC, and deal with. There's no better way to award licenses than auctions. There's no better way. But that doesn't mean that it has to be auctioned necessarily. You still have to address the pipeline issue, and Rick spoke about it. There's going to have to be a mixture of both, and I'm, friends here, licensed and unlicensed / shared. There's ability to address all those areas when you have to deal with the heavy lift, which is shrinking the footprint or making more efficient DoD. But to your point, I understand there are, and I suspect at some point that NTIA will move forward with a more expansive document that will explore different bands that they're thinking of, and we can talk about how they get to the 1,500 megahertz that they would like to do. I did hear at an event the Assistant Secretary say that 1,500 megahertz for commercial use, which I think is really good, not necessarily reflected in the document. And so I think that's helpful. But we absolutely have to have more commercial spectrum for both licensed and unlicensed / shared purposes, and that means shrinking the footprint of our federal users.
Chris, do you have anything you'd like to say about the national spectrum strategy?
Look, I admire that NTIA has started this process, and they seem to be running a fair process to try to spark some movement here. I agree with certainly Commissioner O'Reilly and Rick on the points about the balance of licensed spectrum and shared spectrum and unlicensed spectrum. It's a win-win strategy for everyone, not just the carriers, but folks who can benefit from those shared and unlicensed uses. We seem to be stuck again in a leadership problem where there are different parts of the government with different opinions, and it's up to the elected leaders to wade through that and move us forward with the auction authority that we need and the balance that we've been describing up here.
Okay. Clint, I want to ask you about, the FCC has a proceeding right now on the supplemental wireless coverage from space. Basically, it would seem to be that you're using satellites to supplement coverage from terrestrial wireless networks. This seems like it's going to have some good potential to expand coverage. Are there things you'd like to see out of this proceeding or any guideposts for as it goes forward?
I certainly hope so, and I'm very encouraged that this proceeding is moving forward. There are probably some questions that need to be answered, but both SpaceX and T-Mobile have applications in front of the FCC today that would hasten the arrival of a space-based terrestrial service on the United States that would help do something about the 500,000 square miles in this country that do not have LTE or 5G service today. Getting you to a point where if you can take your phone and have visibility to the sky, you can get SMS, you can get data, you can get voice in a way that we just don't have today, and there's nothing on the drawing board short of that type of technology that will be able to give it to us. So I'm hopeful about the promise of the rulemaking. I'm also hopeful that the FCC can use its authorities to bring this service to light. We've got colleagues, some of whom are not at this table today, who are thinking about the same thing. This is the kind of innovation that could be unleashed with the proper leadership, at agencies and in Congress. And I actually look forward to being able to go into some of these remote places where you have no chance in hell other than maybe a sat phone of actually getting a signal out for pleasure or for emergency. And on the one last point on the Wi-Fi, if anyone here is having trouble getting a Wi-Fi connection, I just tested my T-Mobile phone. I've got 321 megabits down, 45 up. You can come and form a hotspot with me. I'm happy to help keep you connected. So just licensed spectrum has its value, unlicensed does as well. But for my taste, I'm very proud of what we're accomplishing in this very room.
Well, good work, Clint. You succeeded in meeting the comedic exception to our no commercial policy here, and move on to a different subject, I think.
At long last, affordable connectivity program. I teased it enough. So a couple things, $14.2 billion. It's burning at a rate of about $500 million a month. Clint, you mentioned maybe around the elections. Elections span 2-3 years. But I've read and heard maybe even earlier than next November, maybe even first quarter of 2024, that money could run out. A couple things. And I'm going to start with you, Michael. But Clint, I did a little research here in preparation for the panel, which seems like something I should have done, so I did it. And I was like, does T-Mobile, are they participating with their fixed wireless? And I discovered that actually for all of your mobile broadband services. And so things I would like to hear from you guys are like, what does this say about what consumers think the market is for broadband and what technologies are available? Because clearly people are given the choice $30 and there's a $30 tier from a fixed broadband provider, and they're choosing instead to go mobile broadband, for example. So they see these as fungible. The FCC might not ever concede that. And the other thing is, how important do you guys think it is for Congress to re-up this program? This is a program that allows consumers low-income households to participate as fully empowered consumers in a marketplace and make choices about what they want, what is best for them. Do you think this is a superior model to, say, Lifeline? Do you think this is the way we should go forward? Should Congress give more money to this? And I will start with you, Michael.
So there's a lot there. I'll
That's
start
my
with
style.
I'll start.
Andrew's questions are like
Sure.
multi-part.
Let me start with your premise. I wouldn't use the word burn. I would say that program is actually helping by families get connectivity, and it does have a cost of about $500 million, because that's how many 16 plus million families are taking advantage of a program to be able to have broadband in their household. So I'm absolutely a supporter of the program. I think it's the best program we have come up to date, not just on affordability, but in many other situations. So I like different features of it comparably to other things, and I won't mention the other program you did. But in terms of, I do believe we have to address affordability. A lot of money is going out the door to address access, and absolutely. But if you don't address affordability, you have a problem for people who can't, whose budgets are too tight in different scenarios. And it's not just a urban poor issue; it is a rural connectivity issue. And it's R's and D's and reds and blues. It is pretty much diverse in terms of how the dollars have gone out so far, and it'll probably increase on the rurality as more access is built out. So to me, it's, what a couple features I like, as we talked about in other instances, it actually is tech neutral. Take your dollars to what actually meets the best your family's best needs in the situation. And I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't disparage any technology. You as a consumer get, that it's eligible, get to figure out what that works for you. Different technologies have different take rates. So I absolutely think it's something that Congress, one other feature I think that's really important, I actually like that Congress is still involved. People say, we got to get them out, they should appropriate more money than be done with it. And, I don't think, I like the appropriation process because I like USF going through appropriation, but if we separate that context, there is value in having Congress oversee a program. It's where you get to fix some of the deficiencies. And there are some issues here. People are talking about eligibility. People are talking about waste, fraud, and abuse. Congress, without the spotlight, programs go on at the commission, and I know this well, with, on autopilot, and they don't get addressed. So you get a chance to fix some things and turn some dials as needed, but without, ending the program, so I do believe Congress should add more money to the equation and move forward. I'd like to keep it separate from other debates that are out there that are really important, but would make it harder to move. And I do think there's value to the consumers and to the industry for moving this ACP forward in the near term. Because absent this, we're going to have families that get dumped off the system, and we'll have no broadband, and there's lots of repercussions for that. And then you have the issue of what do you do with affordability, who picks up that mantle, whether it be someone at the FCC, which is more problematic in my mind, or at individual states, just an absolute mess going forward. So I'd like to see the Congress move forward. I've made a case on why conservatives should support that. We already know that many people on left-leaning groups are supporting it. We're just hopeful that we can get everybody on board.
Thanks, Michael. And I think probably everybody wants to weigh in on this, and we're running out of time. So if you could just keep your remarks on the brief side. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a rare time where you will get groups on the left and the right saying the same thing. And in Washington, you should pay attention when that happens, because that means there's probably something there. We believe that one of the great successes of the ACP is that it is funded by the federal government. And regardless of what estimate you believe for the expiration of this funding, it should continue. This has been a model of success, and my company would like to see it continue. There may be some in Congress who have a different view, but there were also different views in Congress before the pandemic struck. And I'm hoping that some of the lessons of the pandemic have permanently changed, or at least opened the minds of some people about what a strong, federally funded affordability subsidy can do for their constituents.
And let me amend what I just said. We got a little bit more time than I thought, so you don't have to be quite as brief as I suggested.
Well, wow. Let me get back into disparate impact then. If we got time, no. Just Briefly, yes, we think it's a very good program. It should be re-upped. Consumers have proven it's successful. Over 16 million households now use it. It's about double Lifeline in only a year. And they're getting, those who have signed up for Wireline are getting better service than they did through Lifeline, I think. Our biggest companies have offered a $30 or less product, giving them 100 megabits per second. So basically, effectively for free with the $30 subsidy, they're getting 100 megabits per second into the home, which is great for people trying to work and learn from home. As great as ACP is, and we do think it should be continued, I do want to say that adoption is obviously a more complex problem, and it involves things like literacy, digital skills, and our company is working a lot with trusted digital navigators to meet people where they are and help them get online and stay online. And so, again, it's a comprehensive, not just about affordability, but this is a key piece of it.
I'd echo the point on
Chris, just 1 second. I just got an update.
Oh, we're
Go
out
back
of
to your
time?
normal length
Really?
of discourse.
I'll try to be brief.
Not too brief.
I agree on the digital equity point. We saw our first investment in it in the IIJA from the federal government. Before that, it was largely philanthropy and companies like the folks that these guys represent up here investing in it. And we need a permanent solution on that. Check out our Airways for Equity proposal. I think it's a great idea. Yes, it's better than Lifeline. The ACP, that's a low bar because Lifeline wasn't enough money to cover the cost of broadband. It wasn't a program structured for broadband. This is, we should extend it. We need to come up with a long-term solution. That might be harder politically, but we should think of the extensions of ACP about how we create the room for us to do that hard work that Washington's so good at doing, solving big problems. No, but really, it's important. And so let's do the extension with that in mind. And then lastly, you guys passed on Andrew's point about, doesn't this prove that consumers want wireless? I think it proves that consumers take what they can get. When consumers have a choice of having, low-income families for a long time chose wireless. If they had a choice just between wireless and wireline, they prefer to have both. There's reasons for that. They provide different things. They're both fantastic. But knowing that, we should make sure that the subsidies match the need of households. And if that means having a dual program in the future, that's something to discuss. But mobility is critically important, and you see why people choose that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can get everything they need from it if their data is limited, if they can't have multiple people in their household, tethered to the phone and using video at the same time. Hopefully the advances that companies like Clint's and others are making will get us to the point where, we're certainly seeing it in fixed mobile, the higher quality service. That's what we want to see, but I don't think we're there yet.
Thanks. Clint, Michael, I just want to say, I did not mean burn rate as a pejorative. I was just appealing to all the venture capitalists in the room, and I wanted to know that I could speak their language. So go ahead, Clint.
There was just a reference that Chris made to mobile broadband being the service that you can get. Facts are stubborn things. If you have done any reading of the Pew surveys, which are fantastic, on a wide range of social, family, and community issues, Pew actually asked people about their preferences for how they take their broadband. And consistently, people who have low income, communities of color, consistently choose mobile broadband. And they asked those same folks who were respondents, if you had a choice to have a wired connection in your home, would you take it? And a great percentage of folks who are taking mobile and are mobile only said thanks but no thanks to wireline. Now, the biggest beneficiaries are the companies that are having the biggest draw, to keep the burn analogy going, are fixed broadband companies. They are Rick's companies. They are succeeding wildly and are doing so even with the assistance of the administration through their commitments to speed and other things. But make no mistake, for seniors and in communities of color and a lot of communities that this administration cares about, they want a wireless solution because wireless is synonymous with mobility. So, best of luck, to all of the companies that are out there offering ACP, but I think consumers are voting with their feet, and they're saying exactly what they want.
Okay. I've stepped in because we're going to get lunch in a minute, but we've one thing I'm thinking about. I mean, this panel has been so terrific. There's so much information, and it was such a good exchange. We could resume around 2:30 and just continue. But Rick, I want to, Clint's had an opportunity to talk a lot about mobile, but I know cable and wireline and all those other technologies are important. So I want to make sure we're equal. If you wanted to give a plug as well, you can give a plug too, because to me all of these things are important. I think someone said earlier all of the above for a lot of things. And
yeah, well, we're launching, as you may have heard, our 10G platform, which is going to be a pathway to 10 gigabits. It's multi-gigabit now, and people are. It's not only sort of the speeds; it's reliability, it's latency, it's all the things that people really need as services start developing, and so we're finding that people really do depend on the kind of wired networks that our companies offer. We are also getting into the mobile sphere. And as for sort of coverage areas, we did submit a study in the discrimination point that showed that cable is building out in an equitable way throughout our communities regardless of income, race, or ethnicity, and upgrades as well. So we're pretty proud of our story of starting out with broadband, sort of introducing broadband, and then continually raising the bar, and raising it equitably, we think. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And speaking of being proud, I'm really proud that we were able to put together a panel like this with this expertise and with diversity of opinion, and it's terrific. I'm proud of our Free State Foundation senior fellow and moderators as well. With all of that said, at the same time that we're giving these panelists a round of applause, hopefully that door is going to open shortly thereafter. But let's thank this panel for an excellent presentation today.